Awake, warriors awake, Juve morning come. Juve, Abaluba yeah, yeah, Abaluba yeah, yeah, Abaluba. King gang 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 is Juve. King gang 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 is Juve. Spirit rise come to touch the sun. Darkness pass and the morning come. We done pay homage to the ancestors. We done do the ritual for the libation. So we call in the warriors to stand on guard to protect and preserve this tradition. As we fill each heart, every hollow drum with love. Awake, warriors awake, Juve morning come. The rhythm go turn you round. The warriors coming down. Awake, warriors awake, Juve morning come. The rhythm go turn you round. The warriors coming down. King gang 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 is Juve. King gang 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 is Juve. Iron and steel set ablaze to the dawn. No reason to shelter or run from the storm. The drum call anointing every move we make. The rhythm commanding blood and mind to awake. You can't help but answer this clarion call. Not one man must stumble, not one must fall. Unmasking the spirit, come one, come all, with love. Awake, warriors awake, Juve morning come. The rhythm go turn you round. The warriors coming down. Awake, warriors awake, Juve morning come.
Hello and welcome to the Bubb Report. Last week, some minibus service providers, by way of the National Bus Association in Grenada, took to the streets, donning red bands to protest runaway increases in gasoline prices at the pumps.
But this is how much our bus taken actually when you walk on a day, $180 in gas. Alright? So that is really insane, right? $180 in fuel. That is like 11 gallons. So I just to show the evidence, right?
And then you have like the bigger small business, structured business, they have control over the pricing. So they get to pass that price back to the customer or the consumers, and we can't.
The bus protest in Grenada is, however, a subtext to the issue of rising prices in consumer goods and the overall cost of living on the island. The big picture here, however, is the rise in the global inflation rate in 2021 at close to 2%. The International Monetary Fund warns that central banks in both the developed and developing world would need to find ways to curb this runaway inflation if economies are to meet its expected growth targets for the next fiscal year. Investors are understandably worried about the rapid increase in prices for goods and services, as well as shortages in the global labor market spurred by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Grenada, these inflationary pressures are taking its toll on consumer spending, and is affecting the availability of disposable income as the prices of goods and services and petroleum products have increased substantially over the last fiscal year. Today on the Bubb Report, we examine the reasons behind runaway inflation, the increase in oil and gas prices, as well as the socio-economic impact it is having on the national community. Over in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonzalves was attacked by a projectile thrown by a demonstrator that struck him in the head.
Somebody just passed a stone at the Prime Minister. Hold him! Shield! It's bleeding. The Prime Minister is bleeding. Somebody just bust the Prime Minister head with a stone. Somebody just hit the Prime Minister in his head with a stone.
The attack occurred during the maelstrom of an anti-government protest organized by both the trade union movement and the opposition New Democratic Party to oppose amendments to the Public Health Act that would mandate mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations for certain categories of public sector employees who work in frontline jobs. Unions in the country argue that this move is unconstitutional. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has a relatively low vaccination rate, with only 9% of the population being fully vaccinated. This against the backdrop of a very high COVID-19 case count at 2,298 people and 12 deaths since the pandemic began. We welcome our guests, Garth Woodruff, President of the National Bus Association of Grenada, Jomo Thomas, Human Rights Attorney and former Speaker of the Vincentian House of Assembly, entrepreneur Senator Christy Alley, A.J. Williams, proprietor of Hotspot Grenada, economist Dr. Don Charles, and trade unionist Elroy Boucher. We thank you for joining us. A pleasant good morning, good evening, good night, good day to all the viewers and listeners of the Bubb Report, and we welcome you to yet another installment of the program. And again, I'm hosting on location here in St. George's as opposed to my traditional hosting location in Washington, D.C. My vacation in Grenada is sadly coming to an end, but it's certainly a pleasure to be on island as I will be soaking up the last remaining days on the island at some of my favorite beaches. I have a bias for St. David's, so I usually visit Las Ejes and Kabi and Crucial beaches on that side of the island. Certainly, we want to begin today by congratulating Kirani James on winning bronze at the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. His participation and success at this year's Olympics has to be put in the context of his personal health challenges and personal losses in recent years. James is certainly a Grenadian icon that embodies the positive attributes of what I call Grenadianism. James is Grenada's only Olympic medalist. He won this country's first Olympic gold medal at the London 2012 Olympic Games, and then silver at the 2016 Rio Games, and now a bronze at the 2020 Olympic Games. Talk about MVP status. We certainly take this time to wish Mr. James continued success in his athletic and personal endeavors. And at this time, I want to take the opportunity to welcome my first guests who are joining us from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a returning champion here on the Bubb Report, Brother Jomo Thomas. I call him a comrade in arms, as well as Mr. Elroy Boucher, who is a member of the trade union movement on the island. But Jomo, I want to begin with you. And certainly, we've witnessed this week what some analysts are describing as a sort of a red letter day in Vincentian history with that attack on the prime minister. Now, what I think is that this period sort of reminds me of Dr. Gonzalves' own rise to power 2 decades ago, in which he actually also led mass protests against the NDP administration that led to the ouster of Sir James Mitchell. Are we seeing sort of a similar pattern with this current wave of mass protests on the island? Jomo?
Well, thank you so much for having me yet again.
Yes.
Kilman. It's really my pleasure to be here. I love being on your program. Look, what is happening in St. Vincent does not have the breadth and the weight of what happened in 2000 in terms of mass participation. But that participation is growing, and I think it probably will continue to grow. Over the last few weeks, there have been a series of demonstrations organized mainly by the opposition New Democratic Party or by elements who are associated with the New Democratic Party. Those demonstrations began either late April, early May, and they were concerned with the issue of ULP Senator and Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly, Ms. Ashel Morgan. Ms. Ashel Morgan was at that time accused of threatening to shoot a man in his mouth, and she was also accused of being in a party of 3 who went onto this man's property, kicked him, beat him, shot him in the leg. So these demonstrations have started then. But as we progressed, what we had happening is that the unions, mainly the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Teachers Union and the Public Service Union, began making a lot of representation on the government's effort to vaccinate and test members in those, well, people in the public service. So what we had on Thursday was the government had gone to Parliament and they wanted to make some changes in the statutory law, which was mainly the Public Health Act and the Public Workers Act. Basically, back in February, the government had gone to Parliament and they said then, put into legislation that they intended to have a voluntary, immunization program. On Thursday, the government had proposed to remove the word voluntary, and they also proposed to, whereas in the previous act there was an exemption having to do with children, they removed that exemption as it had to do with children. So a number of people here were of the view that the government was now intent on introducing mandatory vaccination. In fact, the Prime Minister had been on radio over the ensuing weeks and days. He was first advised employers, even before the act was changed, that they can go ahead and fire workers who did not want to voluntarily vaccinate. And he did go on radio on last Wednesday, to again, in a very forceful, almost belligerent address, talked about what is coming and workers would lose their jobs if they don't vaccinate. So on Thursday morning, from very, very early, I would say from about 8:30, people started gathering. And that demonstration went pretty well. It was organized, it was energized. It had much, much more people than had hitherto been the case. You had a situation where, for the first time in a long time, uniformed members of the civil servants, you had nurses, you had some prison officers, people deciding to come out in their uniforms. Evidently, there were other persons who were not in government uniforms. But I think we have broken a barrier which took us all the way back to 2000, when again, in response to certain political activities, public workers, teachers, doctors, nurses all came into the streets. And as you correctly said, that resulted in the eventual removal of the New Democratic Party. In this case, I don't think we have that level of political boil as yet, because we just had elections 8 months ago, 9 months ago, in which
Correct.
ULP was narrowly returned to power. But evidently, you're having this kind of movement around the vaccines. And like I said, that went all very, very well from the morning until the afternoon. Then the Prime Minister was coming back into the Parliament after lunch break, and about 5:15, 5:20 p.m., he, for whatever reason, decided to get out of his vehicle, and in his attempt to walk through, to wade his way through the protesters, it is alleged that he was struck by a stone and injured, as that picture was carried all around the world. Now, clearly, a number of people in St. Vincent have soundly come out and denounced this kind of turn towards violence. As I said in another program in Grenada yesterday, a colleague of mine from Grenada did say, and I absolutely agree with this, that in a sense, it may mean that we have lost our innocence here in St. Vincent, because whereas hitherto we had political violence which had impacted on other members of society, this is the first time in an active demonstration that you had the head of political office in the country, or someone in senior governmental position, being injured, where blood shed. So that is the position here. A lot of what is happening, and I would say this, that to a large extent, the narrative completely changed, and that was unfortunate, because up until that time,
And yes, and Jomo, we would get to that narrative shortly, but I want to bring in
very well,
Mr.
sure.
Elroy. I want to bring you in here, and Elroy, can you hear me first of all?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, and welcome to the report. We're having some issues with his camera, but we would proceed. Mr. Boucher, I would challenge you here. What responsibility do you bear for whipping up the crowd into a frenzy that would allow them to feel it was okay to injure the prime minister of a country? I mean, you can have disagreements with government policy, but for a crowd, some are suggesting that your union sort of instigated. Do you think that you bear any responsibility for what happened to Dr. Gonzalves last week?
I don't think so at all. In fact, I will categorically say that no public servant, not one of them, would get involved in anything, any action that will result in injury to the prime minister, anybody else. We do not participate in violence at protests. In fact, in our case, the protest was quite peaceful. Most of the public servants were in a particular area, which is across the market, and they actually had to move from there. So they were law-abiding citizen workers who decided to express their dissatisfaction with the government's attempt to amend the Public Health Act and the Medical Officers Act. So in no way we will hold ourselves responsible in any way for what happened to the Prime Minister.
Okay, so let us get to the meat of the matter here, and that has to do with the context of the current protests. Now, were you consulted, and what was the nature of consultations that were held with your union before government went to Parliament to make these proposals known to the Vincentian public?
But that's the problem. There were no consultation. In fact, thanks to our lawyers, and one of whom is in studio, it is through our lawyers we actually learned about the proposed amendments. The public itself did know, and if it weren't for our lawyers, we wouldn't have known. And this was happening the first time Parliament was supposed to be held, which was I think last week or the week before Thursday. We learned about it like the Tuesday. It was very, very late, which really didn't give us much time to even do anything. So we were happy that Parliament was actually postponed because we had no clue that government was going to proceed to amend the Public Health Act to pave the way for mandatory vaccination. Absolutely no clue. And that says all in itself that there was no intention by government to have dialogue, any discussion whatsoever, regardless of the impact that this was going to have on public servants. And I must
Now,
tell you,
yes, go ahead.
the World Health Organization in their part of their guidance and their statements with their publication with respect to mandatory vaccination, they have indicated that if you're going to go that route, you must have an input from all stakeholders who are going to be impacted. They strongly stress that there must be dialogue. They even stress that there must be some fund set up to deal with persons who may be injured by after you would have forced them to take a vaccine that has not been approved. So I mean, it's all of these things.
It's been approved for emergency use. You do understand that we are in a global public health crisis. You do understand that as well.
And
yes.
I'm just telling you what the World Health Organization have said, right? Because they made a distinction between emergency use authorization and vaccines that have been given the normal approval. They made a distinction, and they themselves said you cannot compare the two. It's in their writings. You cannot compare the two. That is why they advise that a fund must be set up, because there are a lot of unknowns, and therefore to take into consideration these unknowns and the possible impact on person, if you're going to mandate, you must involve them in the conversation, the discussion, the dialogue, and you must also set up some compensation fund in the event that people get injured or harm comes to those who have severely adverse reaction to any of these experimental drugs.
Okay, and let me bring in Jomo, because Jomo, you are also an attorney representing the trade union organizations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I understand that
just two of them, the teachers and the public servants.
The teachers and the public servants. Now, tell us about the context of this legal action. Would this be limited to St. Vincent and the Grenadines only? Because it may set precedent here, because other Caribbean islands may be going the route of wanting vaccine mandates. I know that in Grenada, for example, hotel workers, there is a mandate for hotel workers to be vaccinated, and that is happening throughout the English-speaking Caribbean. So can you give us some context as to the legal action you're taking, how far you intend to go with this? Is this an injunction? What are you hoping to accomplish?
We haven't been fully advised by our clients as to what action they would want to take. I know a number of persons here in St. Vincent, even persons outside of the unions, have not instructed us in terms of taking one course or the other. One of the ways that we would more than likely go, from my perspective of an attorney, is to do an injunction with the possibility of making a constitutional motion to the court. Some of us are of the view, for example, that the way in which the government is going about this action is unconstitutional. The government seems to be relying on the common law and on statutory law. But Section 17 of our Constitution, which speaks about emergency powers, demands that the government act in a particular way. Section 17 talks about the fact that the medical health emergency must be proclaimed by the Governor General, that emergency has to, for example, Section 17(2)(b) talks about what constitutes a medical emergency, and it talks about pestilence and infectious diseases. The government has said that there has been an emergency since April of last year, But that same section talks about the fact getting a 7-day authorization, then a 21-day authorization, then up to a year of authorization from the Parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And in order to declare that emergency, you have to have 2/3 members of the Parliament doing what they're supposed to do. None of that has been done in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So that's one type of action that we may have to make an approach, to ask the court to make declarations on whether in fact the government has been doing what it is doing in a constitutional fashion.
So that might be a blueprint. Then your legal action, I suppose, might be a blueprint for what may obtain in other English-speaking Caribbean islands. But I'm going to bring in Mr. Boucher again, and to you, both of you gentlemen. I mean, you do appreciate that we are still in a public health pandemic. We do understand that there was the detection of the Delta variant, the highly infectious Delta variant in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So my question to you is, what is the middle ground? What would you propose as a middle ground between protecting public health interests, but also ensuring that citizens' civil liberties are also protected? Elroy, I would start with you.
And that's the reason why I say, if you were having dialogue, right? And I think the Prime Minister Mia Mottley, in my view, is going about it the right way. If you're having dialogue with all stakeholders, then all of those questions can be addressed and answered. They may not be answered to the satisfaction of the government or of the unions, but at least you'll have an opportunity to get to a middle ground. Now, it is not, I don't think it is a fact that, let's say, the frontline workers are opposed to being vaccinated. I think it is the case that people are very careful with this particular vaccine because so much is not known about it in the future, and the information is unfolding all of the time. Because at one time you are hearing that once you're fully vaccinated, you cannot contract the virus or even spread it. But now all of that information currently is changing. So people are concerned. People have also seen side effects that persons who have taken the vaccine have experienced, and some of those side effects are pretty severe. So they are very concerned. And we must understand that in St. Vincent, for example, you have more than 98% of persons who contracted the COVID-19 virus, they have recovered, okay? And they have recovered given their own immune system doing its work. So you have to take all of that into
but that might not apply to everyone as well. I mean,
right, it may not. Right.
There are variables that you have to consider as well.
That is true. And I want to make this point. Before there was a vaccine, these very nurses that our government seems to be attacking now, these very nurses give their hearts and soul. Some of them contracted COVID while caring for patients. There has not been one case in which a patient contracted COVID from a nurse or a doctor, not one. It has been the case where nurses themselves going in to treat these patients have contracted COVID. There was no vaccine. They were praised. They were given awards by companies and by the government for the heroic work that they did. So the thing is, give people the time, give them the information, let them decide whether they want to be vaccinated or not. Give them the options. And there's a lot of misinformation out there as well as good information. And sometimes you have to sift through. Allow them to have that right of conscience.
I'm glad you brought up misinformation. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I'm glad you brought up misinformation. But
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and you go ahead, please. Yes, and I'll bring in Jomo again. Jomo, same question to you. What would you propose? I know that there is litigation, but what, as someone who has been in the politics, as someone who understands public administration, certainly, what would you propose as a middle ground?
Right. Just before I get to that point, because you had asked about the middle ground and what kind of consultations had been taking place, I think one of the things that is rather surprising to a lot of people here in St. Vincent is that we are led by a prime minister, by a man who was very, very cavalier in the first year in 2020 having to deal with COVID. I mean, he was all over the place. He was the most cavalier of any of the prime ministers in terms of his utterances and so on. He didn't want to shake anybody's hand. He asked if a popular person died, whether you would want to send them an email. If a old woman turned 100, whether you would want people not to go to her party and all kind of things like that. So to have that person now morphing into the Ayatollah on the issue of mandatory vaccination is rather surprising. I think that it is true that the World Health Organization has declared a pandemic. I am of the view that in many regards, we cannot do a one-size-fit-all approach. St. Vincent has a situation where there are about 2,000 persons who have contracted the illness. The vast majority of them have recovered. 12 persons have died. We can do the necessary testings that would ensure that our people are safe. We can do all of the things that we were doing before. Before the vaccines came on. But what we should not do, and what we should not be doing, is literally forcing people to take a vaccine, which the World Health Organization has only granted emergency use authorization. And the World Health Organization in its proclamations have said that the longitudinal studies have not yet been done to determine definitively the safety of these vaccines. It has also been said by the World Health Organization in its publications that this is an investigative process that's taking place. Bearing all of that in mind, someone needs to tell me why it is that our government and the other governments across the region and across the world are hell-bent on vaccinating every man, woman, and child on earth. It is true that this is a situation where we have to fight. It's against life and livelihood. But the livelihood which we are talking about, I haven't heard anyone say yet, except for the Grenadine government, that all of the persons who are coming into the country, who would be allowed into the country, must be fully vaccinated. So it seems as though our people here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are being asked to be the guinea pigs, whereas people may be allowed to come into the country who are not vaccinated at all. And even if they are vaccinated, we know, as Brother Boucher said, that someone can be fully vaccinated, and that's where science has led us. That someone can be fully vaccinated, and that person can still contract the disease, they can still become infected, and they can still pass it on to somebody else. Where that is the state of science at this juncture, I can't see how an employer would say, well, I need for you to be vaccinated because I need to have a safe environment. Because if I am unvaccinated and all of the other persons in that firm become vaccinated, or that plant becomes vaccinated, that factory becomes vaccinated, and I become infected, it may well be that one of the fully vaccinated person infected me. So based on the state of science as it relates to the infectious nature of this process, why are people being asked? Why are people being forced? It's a form of economic assassination if you think about it, because you're being told, yeah, you don't, as PM Gonzalves says all the time, you don't have to do this, you have a choice. But what choice do you really have if you're being told that if you don't take the vaccine, well, you can't come to work. If you don't take the vaccine, you wouldn't get paid. That's the crux of the matter. And I think that what we need to do, I am particularly taken by the Barbadian approach. The Barbadian Prime Minister has said, I'm going to get an Attorney General reference. More than likely she has had it already. That she's going to sit down with all of the stakeholders in Barbados and try to come up with a way in which they can well and best deal with this emergency. It is highly unfortunate, and the fact that people resorted to violence, some person resorted to violence and might have injured the prime minister, that has to be condemned. But that doesn't take away from the righteousness of the demonstration which occurred, and I am absolutely certain of other demonstrations which would come in the future.
All right. Well, Jomo, we here at the Bubb Report, we do have plans to visit St. Vincent at some point to really get a sense of what is happening on the ground. Sometimes stories are best covered when you are on the ground. So I want to thank both you and Brother Comrade Boucher here. And certainly we would be watching the space as to what is taking place in St. Vincent. We believe that the Prime Minister indicated there may be some other amendments to the public health bill that obviously is now put on hold because of the atmospherics on the ground. So we will be interested to see.
It wasn't placed on hold, you know.
It was not, but
that bill was passed. That bill was passed at about, I think the Parliament ended on Friday morning at 3.
So it was passed. It was passed. Okay. Thank you for that correction. Thank you for that correction.
Now in St. Vincent, it is no longer a voluntary. That the word voluntary was removed. If you have to, in hitherto, the Medical Officers Act says that where there's any medical procedure that a medical officer had to take, that the state bore the cost of that medical procedure, and in this case, test. What the Act has now done is to remove that section where the state bears the cost, and now each time there's a test, the person who's tested has to spend $27 to get that test. So that's the reality here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's not a pretty one, and it has really been thrown further asunder by the fact that the Prime Minister was injured. But it also shows as well that persons across the region who had been quiet on so many issues, and it shows the class breakdown of these societies and the power structures in these societies, because hitherto all kind of people were being beaten. In that very demonstration on Thursday, persons were struck by the police, including one man that I saw whose head was busted by a police officer. But that has gotten no coverage at all. But I have heard the Belizean government, the Antiguan government, a host of other governments across the region, CARICOM, the University of the West Indies, all of them have now jumped in. And I'm not saying this is improper. All I'm saying is that we can't be so selective when there is difficulties and problems in countries, because if we speak sooner or earlier, we may be able to avert a very damaging, difficult situation. So that's where we are. That's the state of play, and I hope we don't step over the edge and that we're able to pull back. One last point I need to make to you,
yes,
which people may not know,
go ahead,
is that yesterday, as a result of what happened on Thursday, the Black Squad, that selective security arm of the police force, has used warrants to enter into the homes of at least 10 persons, mainly opposition activists, mid-level or lower-level opposition activists. I know of one businessman whose place was searched. They claim that they were searching for arms and ammunition. From the reports that I have heard, no arms or ammunition had been found, and not a single person had been arrested. So it means that the security forces of our country was essentially and may well be continuing on a fishing expedition to see what they can get as a result of the volatile events of last Thursday.
All right, Jomo, thank you again. We have to get to the next segment, but let me thank you. And Comrade Boucher, folks, stand by. We will be taking a break and coming right back with the next segment.
Inflation is the change in the cost of the overall package of things that you buy in the course of your normal daily living. The cost of gasoline, the cost of your housing expenses, the cost of your medical care, the cost of a new motor vehicle, the cost of education that you may purchase. All of those things are included, and that's important to know because inflation isn't tied to any one specific price change. So if the price of gasoline goes up, that's something that each and every one of us experiences, but that in and of itself isn't inflation. Inflation instead refers to the change in the overall cost of the market basket, the complete market basket of everything that you purchase. My market basket, the items that I purchase on a regular basis will be different from yours or from anybody else's. In order to deal with that fact, what we at the Federal Reserve pay closest attention to is a measure of price change that is determined according to the overall buying habits of American consumers all across the country.
And welcome back, folks. Welcome to our second panel segment of the day. And I want to begin by welcoming Dr. Don Charles, who is an economist. He's an energy economist. I want to make that distinction clear, and perhaps at some point he can make that distinction clear for us. But Don, the reason why, Dr. Charles, the reason why I wanted to bring you in here is because throughout the Caribbean, there appears to be sticker shock as a result of inflationary pressures, what some are projecting to be inflationary pressures. Gas prices at the pumps are increasing. Food items in Grenada are also increasing. As we say in Grenada, people are balling out, right? So give us some context as an economist. Can you give us some context as to what is responsible for the current inflationary pressures we're seeing globally that appears to be affecting the Caribbean very acutely at this time?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bubb, for the warm introduction. Now, you said you want some background, some context with inflationary pressures. Well, I'll start with making reference to last year, 2020, because I'll give a bit of a historical context about the sequence of events that occurred to bring it to that brought these change in prices right about now. So last year, 2020, we experienced a pandemic. We all know the pandemic by now, COVID-19. And as a result of the pandemic, we saw several governments around the world implement a series of non-pharmaceutical measures. By now, we all know these measures. We see the closing of the borders, the shutting down of school, the shutting down of all non-essential services, implementation of curfews, and all these different things. Now, initially, these non-pharmaceutical measures were implemented to facilitate the containment of the transmission of COVID-19. What this resulted in is a reduction in economic activity for other countries. And initially, in the first half of, let's say, 2020, we saw a decline in economic activity cause a decline in demand, and it caused a decline in prices of a lot of commodities. So a lot of commodities prices went down, oil prices went down. In fact, oil prices experienced a crash to minus $40 in April 20th, 2020. We see steel prices went down. We see agricultural commodities prices went down. So a lot of primary commodities prices went down in the first half of 2020. However, from the second half of 2020, we saw a lot of countries reopen their economies. So they relaxed their COVID-19 restrictions, opened the different sectors and so forth. And this facilitated a resumption of economic activity. And this facilitated an increase in demand. And the increase in demand drove the increase in prices. Now, I want to make a distinction between the energy prices and the agricultural commodity prices, because with the agricultural commodity prices, it's somewhat different because we had an increase in demand, yes, but at the same time, we had adverse weather conditions. So we had a lot of, we had, come down to the later end of the year, we see a lot of tropical storms and depressions and hurricanes and so forth. We also had a lot of countries that produces agricultural commodities. We see out of drought conditions, we see out of bushfires, and these taking place. These things reduce supply, and the decline in supply is placing inflationary pressure for prices to go up. So in case of agricultural commodities, there are two factors. There are supply side factors where the adverse weather conditions is reducing supply, and the reduction in supply is placing pressure for prices to go up. At the same point in time, the reopening of countries' economies is increasing demand and it causing prices to go up then. So that's for the agricultural commodities. Now, in the case of energy commodities, especially oil, there was a case where there's an increasing demand due to the relaxation of countries' COVID-19 restrictions. So that's one. The second thing was a result of the OPEC, well, I wouldn't say OPEC, but the OPEC plus, how I can say, curtailment or production cuts. Are you familiar with the Vienna Agreement?
I am not. I am not. You would be schooling me today.
Okay. Well, I'll give a bit of historical context again here. So in 2014, the price of oil crashed. So the price of oil was roughly around $100 a barrel in 2014, around June, July. And then it crashed to roughly about $60 by the end of the year. Now, usually when the price of oil declines, OPEC would cut production. When it cut production, this will facilitate an increase in price of oil. However, in 2014, they did something different in the sense that they didn't cut production, they increased production, because what they was trying to do, they was trying to force US shale oil producers off the market because they were fighting for market share. Now, that strategy didn't work because in 2014, the US shale oil producers proved themselves to be very resilient, and they survived the market. They survived the low oil prices that declined to about $26.
So in other words, yeah, in other words, what you're telling me here is that, well, you have a few stressors. You have the climate change impact, which people tend to think, again, I study climate change as well. That is
Yeah.
that remote impact that forest fires in California may not affect what's happening in Grenada. But you're telling me that that is a factor here that's affecting supply.
Agricultural commodities.
Correct. You're also telling me that there is a geopolitical element here in that OPEC, because I want to understand that OPEC sets all oil prices. Is that correct?
They influence oil prices. They are not the official set of oil prices because there are a number of different actors in play that influence oil prices. So I was going into a long story, but to make the story short, in 2016, the OPEC and non-OPEC producers agreed to a new arrangement called the Vienna Agreement, where they agreed to implement production cuts. So that's since 2016, this Vienna Agreement was signed, and this group is now referred to as OPEC Plus Alliance. Now, after the oil price crash that took place in 2020, that was around April, they met and they decided to reduce oil production by roughly 10 million barrels. So there's a large or unprecedented curtailment implemented by OPEC, which actually acted as support to lift oil prices. So it's two factors that actually served to increase oil prices in 2020 going into 2021. One is the resumption of demand due to the relaxation of the COVID-19 restrictions by countries. Two is the OPEC plus oil curtailment, which is acting as support to push up oil prices. So these two factors actually serve to increase oil prices. So oil prices rose from the negative $40 per barrel, that was in April, to about $77 in July this year, July 2021. Now, there was strong growth in the oil market. It was even what we call bullish, strong oil prices, because $70 oil prices is high in them, because it's about 6 years since we've seen oil in the $70 area. So oil prices were so high that OPEC in July had a meeting and actually decided to change their position in the sense that it was deciding to more or less increase their oil production. They decided to increase oil production by roughly 400,000 barrels every month going for the next 6 months. So this will be maintained until the end of 2021, where they'll, at the end of the year, they'll reassess the market and determine what they'll do next in terms of their market strategy. So in going forward, I do not think, so although oil prices right now, I think it was Thursday, oil prices reached something like about, it declined slightly, it declined to about $69 or so. And I do not think oil prices will go beyond $80 going on to the end of the year, simply because OPEC has revised their strategy and they have decided to increase their production. So I think the resistance, which is like an invisible price ceiling for oil, will be roughly about $80. And I think support could be roughly about, let's say, about $60. And the reason why I'm saying support, which is like an invisible price floor for oil prices, will be about $60 is because so much countries have reopened their economies. We've seen countries experiment with travel bubbles. We've seen that countries are actually rolling on the vaccine. So the whole countrywide lockdowns that we saw in 2020, I don't expect the same thing to happen on a global scale in 2021 as happened in 2020. So I think oil prices for the rest of the year could fluctuate anywhere between $75, $77 and about $60 for the end of the year going forward.
So you're
For
telling me that the
20
markets would be volatile.
consolidating.
Let
Yeah.
me see if I can bring in Mr. Garth Woodruff, who is the president of the National Bus Association. Mr. Woodruff, good morning to you. It's still morning. Welcome to the Bubb Report, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I know that it's Sunday. I don't know if you ply the Grenadines route. So if you don't ply the Grenadines route, then probably it's your day off. But thank you for taking the time. I know busmen in Grenada tend to be very busy. So thank you here for coming on. Tell us the context of your protest last week, Mr. Woodruff. The government, you just heard Mr. Charles here about the volatile state of the economy. How is that impacting your business as busmen?
Good morning, Kellon. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
All of this has impacted bus operators in Grenada, and I do ply the Grenadines route, but I don't work on Sundays.
Okay.
All of this has impacted busmen in Grenada tremendously in a negative way for the most part. Since I'll just give you a bit of a backdrop from the time we were on lockdown, right? We had no source of income. There was a bit of a stimulus package, however, but that had to be split. That was $800 that had to be split into three between the owner, the conductor, and the driver, right? So that lockdown period went on for about, as I said, 3 months. Then when we started back operating, right, we had a passenger limit of 4 persons, right? Then it went up to about 12. Then last year, October 2020, I believe it went up. We had full capacity. Then when you look back, right in December, right, we had another cluster of COVID-19. So then there was a curfew. So transportation could not go past 8 o'clock. You know, we would have to finish work at, you know, some 6:30, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, just to get home, depending on which part of the island you live, right? So we could not really operate as we normally do, right? During that time. Now there was a moratorium, and at that point in time the moratorium had expired, and there was a strain of financial owners, right, to actually maintain their buses the way they should, and, you know, to pay the same salary to operators as they should. So there was a financial strain for owners, and hence we saw the depletion of the quality of buses that we saw on the road, right? You know, buses were poorly maintained and so on, and that has been an issue before, but this situation skyrocketed that, and then looking at fuel prices, as Don would have said, back then in 2020, in May or around there, gas price here in Grenada was $11.34 per gallon, but now we are facing $16.36 a gallon, right? So if I go to compare that price to now, on a monthly basis, we are putting in an extra $1,200 in fuel costs only, right? So that is one of the things that fueled, you know, that protest, the conditions in which we operating under, you know, conditions of the road, and, you know, these type of things. We could not really continue, right, operating the way we are right now.
Okay, but Garth, let me press you here. Certainly, you are protesting against the government of Grenada. The government of Grenada would say to you that they don't have control over oil and gas prices. As a matter of fact, let me pull up a clip here from the Minister of Finance, Gregory Bowen, who said the following at a press conference last week. I want you to listen to this.
We recognize that we have no control whatsoever the prices at the pump, and they're asking for reduction. The only way you can give a reduction to the price at the pump is to cut back on government's revenue at this particular time, and there is a fixed price. So when the input price, the CIF comes in, you simply add a fixed margin. So it is not a percentage to say that government taxes will go up when the price landed in Grenada goes up. It goes up, it goes down, government receive one fixed amount. Say X dollars on every gallon, X does not vary. We do have, at the same point in time, the chambers of commerce coming to us to say that goods from Asia, if a container used to cost before $5,000, it is now $15,000. And so the commercial people must pass on the cost to the consumers. And they have requested of the Ministry of Finance to reduce the tax on this. So we have tax reduction one way, tax reduction the other way. Right now, we have to get funds in to help our indigent people so we understand what is happening out there. But at the same time, you must understand that's the only way to give a break is to cut back on the limited revenues. We've heard it time since the Prime Minister was Minister for Finance. You were there. We told you that nearly 50% cut in revenues. And the recovery is very slim. What we're walking along is the same sort of intake as we had in 2020. We're not up there close to 2019. So we're not out of the doldrum.
Mr. Woodruff, we are not out of the doldrums. What do you expect the government to do? They are operating on a deficit, really.
I have not known that they are operating on a deficit, so I'll respond to that, right? On every gallon, as you would heard Minister Bowen said, government collects a tax. That's about $5.50 per each gallon, right? No, what we had, yes. So what we had asked is that as a concession to bus operators, since we have seen a 50% reduction in the amount of people that travel due to SGU, no construction, hotels, restaurant, entertainment, and these sort of things happening, right? We had asked, okay, can we have a reduction in that tax to ease or cushion, the financial or the operational strain that we are experiencing, right? So we wrote to them and they responded and they said no, right? Now, he mentioned as well, pass the costs on to the consumer. So is Minister Bowen basically saying to bus operators that no, since we have this high cost, we should now pass it on to the public who use public transportation? Now, if that is what he is saying there, then we would welcome a discussion to have that discussion with him, right? To see now where will we go as bus operators, because and let me point out here that bus price in Grenada, we don't have the luxury of passing the cost on. This is something that we have to consult with government on. So we would have to have a discussion, right? And I'm looking forward to having a discussion with government, right, as to how do we pass that cost on to the consumers or to the traveling public of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, right? Now, among some of the other things that have been affecting us, right, freight, that has also increased the cost of our tires, upholstery work, leatherette and other stuff that we use, to cover our seats, carpets, and all of these type of things. All of products that we use to clean, all of these things, the general operational cost has increased, right? So we have been trying to find ways, right, without pushing that strain to the public. But now that we are at this juncture, right, and this is what fueled the protests, the bad roads, the high operational costs, we're unable to pass it on to our consumers, right? And we have to look at the safety of the people that are traveling on these buses and the condition of these buses and so on, right? So this sort of sums it up. right? And I must point out again, buses in Grenada are 100% privately owned, right? We, the owners of these buses, we invest our money 100%. We pay the insurance. We don't get any sort of concessionary subsidies or any sort of thing from government. So we operate 100% on at our own risk, right? So I hope that satisfies.
Okay, let us come up for air, and then when we come back, I have Brother Williams of Hotspot, Grenada, and Senator Diali. They also, the other issue that we're having here has to do with really the sticker shock, not only at the gas station, but at the supermarkets. And I know that Brother Hotspot, he's been doing things to really get, to keep consumer confidence going, if you will, while also trying to make a profit and trying to stay above board. So we will take a quick break, and we will come back with those two gentlemen. And Mr. Charles, Dr. Charles, thank you for staying with us. We want you to respond to a number of the concerns that we're hearing here in ways that we can try and mitigate these economic circumstances that are confronted by the region at this time. Just stand by, folks. We will be right back.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not fair? You don't know the terms.
We love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm going to live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? Welcome back, folks. And I have here now Mr. A.J. Williams and Senator Christopher Diali, who are both retailers in different spheres. Economic spheres of Grenada, but Senator, you represent the business community in the Senate. Now, I want you to give us a forecast, Senator, with respect to the current inflationary pressures that we are confronting in Grenada at this time. What are the concerns of the business community, and how are you managing expectations during this very volatile period?
Kevin, thank you for having me on the program. Let me, of course, join in all the folks who have congratulated Karani on his outstanding achievement, third time around for Grenada, and we fully support this young man, and I'm so proud of all the challenges he have had to face, as you indicated earlier in the program, and just reaching where he reached, I think, was a proud moment, much more winning a medal for us again, And I heard that he have aspirations for 2024, so that's excellent. That being said,
yes.
Let me say that the pricing situation and the imported inflation situation that we're seeing now is not something easy for countries like us who are net importers to deal with. In the oil situation, and I heard Dr. Charles refer to it, we are net oil importers and not like Trinidad who are net oil exporters, and that creates a different scenario for us. Whereas the Trinidadian government would welcome an increase in oil prices going back up because it buffers the economy. We don't. We're on the reverse side of that. But getting back specifically to Grenada and the situation that we're seeing, one of the major issues for us is freight. And I give you a little example of freight. About 6 months ago, I was paying $9,000 for a 40-foot container out of Miami. $10,000, now I'm paying $20,000. So I have seen 100% increase in freight on stuff that I'm bringing into the country. Similarly, retail and Hotspot and these guys are all seeing the same issue with freight. There's a significant increase in freight charges coming in to the country from all the shippers. And we may argue what are the different reasons for that. There are many reasons, and with that also come logistical challenges as well. We can't get goods in on time as we'd want to. Shippers are telling us there is no space on the ships, there is no containers available, so there's significant delays in products coming into the country because of the shipping issues. And just recently, this week, I got a new charge that they are announcing. It's called an imbalance charge. between 1,000 US and 1,200 US. And that imbalance charge is to try and rebalance where empty containers are versus where full containers, and the ships having to deal with that. So we continuing to see increases in that area, and that is putting serious pressure on the prices. The other aspect, as Dr. Charles alluded to as well,
yes,
the issue of
go
supply
ahead.
and demand.
Go ahead.
And there is a serious issue with supply, whereas as we open back up for livelihoods and indeed in our economies, the demand for goods and services are significantly more than is available. And with the shutdown across the world, I give you an example with steel. Steel in India, India is one of the major producers of steel, iron rods. And because of the shutdown, a lot of the factories could not be reopened. So there's a greater demand for steel now than there was prior to that. Steel has gone up significantly. So somebody who was building a home, I was reading an article recently that said just the price of steel will push the cost of the home up by $20,000 more. So could you imagine you're going to a bank for a mortgage for $400,000 and your cost of construction material, lumber, steel, cement, and all of those things are going up, and you now have to go back to the bank for another $60,000, $80,000 that you may not be able to afford because of your mortgage and the conditions of your mortgage. So I say all of that to give some context of what is happening with us with prices. How we deal with it is not going to be easy, and I was listening to the president of the Bus Association, and it requires all of us to sit and understand how we deal with this situation, and how we, all of us as individuals have a responsibility to probably look at our situation and probably curb some of the things that we normally would have done before.
Yeah, and Mr. Williams, let me bring you in here. You know, you run a supermarket, a chain of supermarkets, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Grenada, is it a case that you're passing on these increasing overhead costs to the consumer, so that consumers now are in a place where they do not have a lot of disposable income? You need to unmute the mic there. Your mic. Yeah.
Right, my bad. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for welcoming me on the show. I must say thank you. Let me just say this, right? What we are seeing now, we are seeing due to COVID, we are seeing unemployment on the rise, right? And also you are seeing prices going up, right? And as the other people on the show mentioned, why? Because of freight and all these things, right? In some cases, freight have doubled, right? So you find out that people are not working, and also you have prices going up. So you have the spending power of people is decreasing, you know, day by day. Now, last year you had a moratorium, and so in 2020, right? And people were kind of given a little slack. Now this year there's no slack whatsoever. Now, in some cases, we have no choice but to pass it on, but to pass the price increase to the customers. For example, you have cooking oil. Cooking oil that used to cost maybe $12 before, now it's $20, right? Cooking oil that used to cost approximately $100, that's the 18 liters or the 5 gallon. Now is $140, $150, $160, $170, $180, right? So in some cases, you have no choice but to pass it on, right? And in some cases, again, you may try to squeeze as much as you can, but there's just so much that you can do. So right now, it's a really difficult situation, and I see it even getting worse because the container shortage, you know, to me it will get worse because we are now in August, going into September, and then by the time you turn, we are headed into December. Now, what will happen in December? There will be more demand for goods, right? If there is more demand for goods and the supply of container remains the same, you find that the container cost may even go up even more. And what we are having now, besides container cost going up, is scarcity, right? For the last month or so, we had no chicken wings in Grenada. Because why? The companies ordered chicken wings, but they just couldn't get it in. No containers to put it in, right? Just last week, chicken wings came from country code so that we can get. Now you have no white sugar in Grenada, no brown sugar in Grenada, right? And it has been so for a little while. Now, So we are seeing scarcity of goods on the market because it cannot come in time. And also we are seeing the rise in freight. Now for Christmas now coming, you will find the situation being even worse because there's more demand, as I just said, So it's a really difficult time. And I can tell you, Bob, I am sorry for Grenadians and the Caribbean. And, Grenada, I've been doing some price comparison also, right? And the prices of items in Grenada somehow is a little bit more than most of the other islands, right? For example, a pound of white sugar in Grenada is $1.95. A pound of white sugar in St. Vincent is $1.50, right? A pound of flour in St. Vincent is $1.25. A pound of flour in Grenada is $1.60, right? So it's a really tight situation for Grenada. It's a case where we have to put our heads together to see what solution can we find, to chart the way going forward. I have some ideas, I would love to share it someday, but we have to come together to see what we can do to go the way forward. Bob.
Yeah, so I'm curious here, and I'm going to ask both Senator Dialli and Mr. Williams this question. What about the local supply chain? Ways in which the local supply chain, when are we talking about local poultry producers? We're talking about, sourcing local provisions and things like that. What is that looking like to be able to mitigate and to augment these supply chain pressures from outside?
Well, I
How are we
believe
using that, Senator?
on the poultry side, there has been significant improvement in poultry and new entrants into the poultry market supplying local chicken, and that has continued to grow. However, the price of the locally produced chicken continues to compete most times on the higher side to the imported one from, say, Brazil and other places where the Grenadian miners and so on traditionally bring in chicken from. And of course, a lot of that has to do with economies of scale. First of all, they can't compete with these big supplier and producers. And of course, the cost of feed for the local producers is another issue that needs to be looked at. And I know there's initiatives being looked at with government and the local feed producer to see how that can be looked at in a way that will make it a little more affordable for local producers. But I think the wider question is that, as I said, we are a net importer of nearly everything. Apart from chicken, we import everything. Sugar, Mr. Williams was mentioning sugar, flour, rice, you name it. We import nearly everything in Grenada, and that is part of the problem. And what we didn't add to this mix, Kelon, is the whole issue of Grenlick. In recent months, Grenlick would have sent analysis of where the fuel charges have gone. It has almost gone up by 100%. I think the last release was 41 cents per kilowatt unit versus where it used to be in the 20s. So that, again, you hear a lot of consumers talking about the Grenlick bill have significantly increased over the last few months. And once energy prices are going up, apart from fuel at the pump, you will find that everything else escalates because overhead costs for Mr. Williams and people like myself who have high utility costs have to recover these costs somewhere. But as said, we can't pass on all the price increases. I have seen raw material prices in my business go up by 40, 50%, 30% on average going forward. I can't pass all that on to my consumer, or as none of my products will sell. We have to maintain a certain balance and look at the competition to see how it's going. So we as businesses have to absorb some of these costs. And once you do that, it makes it for us now to look internally to see how we could cut cost efficiency, or we could get more cost efficient, cut areas that are not really needed, and see how, because we had to try and preserve profitability for our shareholders. So it really becomes a test and how we do what we do in order to deal with it, because you could just pass on so much price increases to your consumers in order to maintain your sales and your sales revenues.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah. So my thing is that I think some years ago, right, we had lost the vision, right? And I am always an advocate for locally produced products, right? I think that we have to start to look at ways, of being self-sufficient? How can we, right? When you look at our
And
advantage,
we have been having this conversation for decades now about eat
right.
what you grow and you eat, local food security and things like that. But we are still in a place where we continue to be, as Senator Diali said, a major net importer of food products. I remember the late George Brizan, an economist himself, spoke about value added, adding that value to locally produced agricultural products. And I do not know that we have gotten to that vision that he really wanted for Grenada, or as a matter of fact, for that vision that the Grenada Revolution had for Grenada. So please
Right.
proceed, Mr.
Right.
Williams.
And my thing is that what is our advantage in the Caribbean, right? Our advantage is not computers, right? We cannot beat America and China and so for these things, right? Our advantage is the land. Face it. This is our advantage. In school, they teach you that math and English is the two most important subjects, right? But I beg to differ. Why not include agriculture? This is our This is where we have the competitive advantage in the land. So if we are doing enough to be self-sufficient, and if we are using our land effectively, I will say no. And right now we are paying for it. No, we just had a case where St. Vincent had a volcano, right? And some of the land would have been destroyed with the ashes and all these things. What did we do to take advantage of that situation? What did we do, to get into some of the markets that St. Vincent cannot supply now, right? So we are still being laid back in agriculture. And I'm saying, we need to get more involved in agriculture. Now, we have a farm here called Excellent Farm. I went up to the farm some months ago and I did a live video because I was so impressed with the local chicken, the quality and everything. But I try my best to support them and to purchase their chicken as much as possible. But to be honest with you, Bob, I don't think that they really get the full support of the business community, right? I still think that they need a lot more assistance, right, to get this to being the best quality and to get it really off the ground how they really want it to be, right? I'm saying that we are not doing enough, right, to assist the local man in securing our food source, and we need to do more, right? And my thing is that if we try our best to be self-sufficient. Now, let me just say something. Every time, listen this, right? Every time we import, we are helping build someone else's economy. Let me say it again. Every time we import, we are helping build someone else's economy. I am saying, I agree that there are some stuff we need to import, but there are some stuff that can be grown here, that can be produced here, and that we can push here. Why not do it? And we have to start doing that. Imagine this, Bob, right? Let us say, let me take a product, let's say saltfish. If we were to be importing saltfish, this is money that we would have going out of Grenada to buy saltfish to feed the local economy. If we support corn fish, right, instead of saltfish, you are supporting the local fishermen here. That money that you have going outside can stay in the Grenadian economy and help build it. So we have to look at ways to being self-sufficient. We have to look at ways to utilizing our God-given product, our land, and and try our best to get out of this situation. So that's just my take on it.
And let me bring back Dr. Charles here. You've been laying in wait, Dr. Charles. Thank you for being so patient with us and for really looking at these economic shocks, the impact that these economic shocks are having on specific to the Grenadian economy. But what would you propose if you were to be advising, let's say, the Grenada government on, I guess,
policy
state
measures?
initiatives to really policy measures to really mitigate against these impacts, especially on the consumer, because this is hitting the consumer hardest. Certainly, businesses also have to look at the bottom line, which is important. They're not in business as a public service; they're in business to make profit. So what would you propose, especially in this time?
Well, I'll give the whole issue some thought, and I came up with 4 points. Now, I want to start first by emphasizing that I agree with the points made by both Mr. Christopher and Mr. Williams. I agree. You totally have a good argument. We are Caribbean islands, and yes, we import other products, and other products that we import, we can actually produce these products. And I agree with the point made by Mr. Williams that every time we import a product, we are actually helping build someone else's economy. And there's a whole argument with the whole circular flow of income. If it is we encourage more local production, let's say we start with agriculture products, both primary agriculture and agro-processing, this helps one, it generates employment, it generates two, the circulation of income within the economy, three, it prevents the leakage of foreign exchange, four, now we get in the commodity that you would normally import is now available locally, so you're not getting the product to use to forever consumption purpose. So I totally agree with the point where we were trying to facilitate an increase in production of agriculture products, and I want to emphasize both primary agriculture and agro-processing, because I think in the scope of value chain, in terms of you can manufacture different primary agriculture products into more processed products. So that's one point. Now, the second point I want to emphasize is that what I will likely expect is that there will be some passing on of the price increases to the consumer. Yes, I mean, when a consumer experiences an increase in the price, let's say we have in case of oil, we as Caribbean countries, so with the exception of Trinidad and Tobago, and with the exception of, let's say, Guyana, all the other Caribbean countries would be net importers of oil. So we are, as importers, we cannot influence the price of oil in any international market. And when the price of oil increase, the price of gasoline will increase, the price of diesel, bunker fuel, all the different refining products price will increase. And eventually that will reach the consumer at the pump. So eventually the consumer will experience an increase in the price of fuel. I mean, from a customer point of view, this is not much you could do. This is just a given. So there will be a price increase. They will pass on the price increase to the consumer. And what I expect some consumers to do, like let's say you're in some kind of transportation business, let's say you're a taxi driver, you will try to see how best you could try and pass on the price increase to the customer that utilize the services. Now, I don't know exactly how it works in Grenada in terms of the legislative and policy arrangement in terms of like a price increase for the, let's say, for taxi fares and so forth. I suspect there will be some kind of process, but I think the stakeholders will try to pass on the price increase to the different customers and so forth. So the third point, I'll agree with the point with Mr. Christopher again, that you want to try to be more cost efficient. You try to look after your whole operation to try to see how best you could how best you could cut costs in different ventures and try to best to be more efficient in producing whatever goods and services that you offer. Now, the fourth point is an initiative that I actually familiar with because I actually have some experience working in Ministry of Trade in Trinidad and Tobago. And from a policy level, what I think that governments can do is to I wouldn't say interfere, but can affect the common external tariff. So as Caribbean countries, there's a common external tariff which all Caribbean countries are supposed to impose the same tariff on goods outside of the Caribbean region. I think that what the CARICOM could do, they could apply to quota to actually manipulate, or it's called the whole process is called a suspension of the common external tariff. I think this is something that they could apply to do. So whereby, let's say, you can increase the tariff on, let's say, some products. So you want to discourage the import of some products, and you might decrease the tariff on, let's say, some CARICOM products because you want to import these products from your CARICOM neighbors at a cheaper price to reduce the price impact on the consumer. And I want to emphasize this point is because what we really want to do as Caribbean countries is that we want to help facilitate the intra-regional trade within the region, meaning that if it is you cannot produce sufficient quantities of certain products, why not import these products from your CARICOM neighbors and impose a higher tariff on your, let's say, the extra-regional partners, and when you do that, basically you facilitate more circular flow of income within the Caribbean region, and you will help impose like a tariff on the extra-regional partners then, and this will help build the region, build the Caribbean, the whole Caribbean and Caribbean economy. I want to emphasize this point because yes, we are Caribbean islands, but we have to think of ourselves as more as individual islands, as a region, because we cannot do everything by ourselves. We have to work as a region. I really think that if we work as a region, we can address a lot of the challenges, especially inflationary challenges that we are facing, and we can help curb these challenges, and we help grow and build ourselves as a region. So that is the For my past experience, I'll make this point.
Yes, I see, Mr. Williams, you are nodding here, and then I'm
Yeah.
going to bring in Senator Diali and Mr. Woodruff. Yes,
Right.
Mr. Williams, proceed.
No, that's an excellent idea, right? Sometimes as a small man, we think that we are not significant, right? But we are significant, right? And if that point that the gentleman just made, the economist, if we just could see ourselves as being much more, right? Sometimes we don't, just by encouraging the inter-regional trade, right? We can help cut back a lot on even on our imports, on freight and everything. But also, let me just say something, Bob, right? We are here, that the freight cost has increased, causing the price of the goods to also increase, right? Now, when freight costs increase, what also increase is duties, because you pay duties on CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. Hence, if cost, your insurance, or your freight goes up, the one that it will affect the total that the duties have to be tax, right? So my thing is that now, as a government, right, a solution, because everyone in the region will be faced with the same thing. So what I think that governments can do in the region to help curb the situation, right, to help the prices of the goods to not increase by so much, right, to assist, is why can't the government say, you know what, okay, if freight cost used to be as Senator Diadi just said, he used to pay $10,000 for a container, right? Now it's $20,000 for a container. So if that cost increased by 10,000, why not? When Mr. Diali bring in his goods now, charge him charge duties on the all freight, charge duties on the $10,000 and not the $23,000, right? I am saying that if government can do that, what can happen is that now the price of the goods may not increase by so much, because now instead of using the duties on, let's say it's 10% duties, right, on $20,000, now you are paying $2,000 more duties. However, if you use the old duties rate of $10,000, right, now you 10% of 10,000 is $1,000. I'm just using figures, right? So I'm saying, why not try to curb the situation by charging the duties rate on the old freight instead of using the new freight, which will just inflate things even more. That's just one way of helping to curb the inflation situation that is happening now. And it's just a matter of being creative and innovative.
Senator, these suggestions, and Garth, I'm going to bring you in as well from a transportation perspective. You might have some ideas, but Senator, I'm going to get to you. I need you to just piggyback on some of the proposals that Dr. Charles and Mr. Williams just made. How do you react to that?
Yeah, and that is what Mr. Minister of Finance, Mr. Bowen, alluded to when he spoke about the private sector came to them to speak about adjustments and for containers coming out of Asia and out of China. That is exactly what we were proposing, what Mr. Williams just came up with. The inter-island trade between that Dr. Charles spoke about, remember, all the OECS islands are huge importers from Trinidad. We do a lot of business with Trinidad. The issue for us now with price increases from Trinidad is not so much is freight as well, but you have issues with logistics and getting stuff out of trade. Even the trade with the small boats between Trinidad and Grenada, even that is becoming problematic because of freight charges and the cost of bunker fuel and so on and fuel. So it is not that trade continues to be good, a big trade part for us. We trade a lot with Trinidad and Barbados to some extent as OECS territories. But the real issue for us is how you deal, and that idea of trying to calculate the duty on old CIF value, which would probably be a reduced freight value, has been proposed to government, and this is what Gregory Bowen alluded to, and that is what they're considering. But remember, government has to also maintain some level of revenue intake. Yes, they're probably getting more now, and that is the argument we're going to them to say, see and how we could adjust it coming from a pandemic environment and ease the burden. I want to just deal quickly with two things. First, Mr. Williams spoke about commodities and promoting value added, and Dr. Charles spoke about it already. Coming out of COVID, Grenada has significantly improved its fresh produce production with its farmers, and we have had a lot of discussions through Marketing Board and other agencies, Ministry of Agriculture and so on, to plan better production from farmers and how we do what we do with fresh produce and get it more streamlined, because that has been a significant issue we have faced. So all of those discussions that was alluded to prior have been taking place, and looking at ways to see how we could get farmers to be more productive and to plan their production better so that you don't have shortages at various times in the year. And that is a critical aspect of how we go forward. The value added, on the other hand, seems to be of greater challenge. We have had a number of people who have dealt with value added. I've had businesses. We had a company in St. David doing juices, and there seem to be a lot of issues with value added and cost of production and what is happening there. And that is part of the conversation, because we have had a number of value added industries start. We have people doing breadfruit flour. We have a number of things on the table on the initiative. We have a lot of areas that we're looking at with value added. The issue now has to be going down and digging deep to find out exactly what is causing some of these value added businesses to fail, and how we need to encourage and deal with that problem on that level. So that is something that we have to look at. The last thing I want to address quickly,
yes.
Sorry, Kellan, and I know it's 12:32 and we're getting close to ending.
Yes.
The last thing I want to say to my friend in the Bus Association, it is important for us not only to talk contextually of what has happened to the busmen and what have happened to them, and we all know that they have suffered significant income changes because of COVID and what has happened there. But with the gas prices, I think part of the conversation needs to say, and I saw your introductory thing where the gas man was saying he's paying now $180 at the pump to fill up at $11 for 11 gallons in his bus. I don't think the busmen fill up twice a day. So what needs to be said is, before your gas price reach at, and I think the president said it's now $16. It used to be about $11 a few months ago. So that's a $5 increase. I am assuming that before $180, it was about $160, $170. So what is the real increase in gas? Is it $50? Is it $60? And if you spread that across the number of passengers, because remember, you want to increase the price for a single passenger, let's say by 50 cents, to move it from $2.50 to $3 or $3 to $3.50. How much of that do you need to recover, knowing the amount of trips you make a day? And that has to be a part of the conversation for us to fully understand. When you get this increase in costs on gas, and I know the bus president said that there is also increase in tires, there's also increase in brakes, there's also increase in oil, there's also increase in all of these things that the busmen have to meet. Tires is not every month. Tires is probably once a quarter, depending on how frequent you do your bus and you fly. For the men who are going over the hills to Grenadines and Sauterres, it may be heavier in brakes, buses, tires, oil, and so on. But the busman needs to come to the public and say, my average price 6 months ago to maintain my bus per month was $3,000. It now moved to $3,200 or $3,500, $3,300. And that is why I need to justify an increase at 10 cents, 15 cents across my average passengers that I ply a day. And I think that has to be a central part of the argument, because the price increase they're seeking is for every single passenger on a trip up and down. So we need to have that conversation.
But Senator, at the same time, before Mr. Woodruff responds, and I'm going to get you to respond, but the bus association, buses in Grenada, they are restricted from making those price increases. It is a regulatory body that's responsible for doing that. But let me stick a pin, Mr. Woodruff.
Well, that is correct, and that is why I say the argument has to be put forward like that. That is all I'm saying.
Yes, and let me get to Mr. Woodruff. Mr. Woodruff, please proceed.
First, I want to correct Mr. Diali. We did not propose. I don't know where you would have gotten that. We did not propose a price increase.
I didn't say you did. I'm just saying that needs to be part of the argument.
Okay, that needs to be part of the argument. No,
I didn't say you did propose a price increase.
Okay. Now, also, St. David's, Zone 2, Eastern Main Road, they fill up twice a day, right? Those costs, right? There's different routes where the cost, right, is more than some in different areas. Now, we have some figures that we will propose to government, right? Now, we have been proposing and we have been having these discussions. As a matter of fact, maybe since last year, we have been having these discussions and we have provided data as well. A year and a few months later, and nothing has been done. Now, this last year when we proposed this, it was because we were asked to carry less passengers, right? Now, since then, we have made certain analysis and we have data. We have done some of our groundwork, and we do have some information that we have to share. The problem here is right now is that the last correspondence that we had sent out to the Ministry of Transportation, Works, and so on, and the Transport Commission, right? We have not gotten a response yet. We have not gotten an official response from the letter that we have sent yet. So we are yet to have a discussion. While our members in the association remains under these hard costs, right? So we want something to be done, and we want to move aggressively to get this sorted out. Now, I have to also point out that we do not carry as much passengers as we used to, all right? So the amount of persons who use public transportation is not as it was before. Now, pre-COVID, right? Operators, we were already operating at a loss. What COVID did was show it, bring it to the forefront more, right? So we were operating at a loss before. Now, in terms of price increase, if we were to go down that road, if you look at it, it's been about 15 years since we've had a price increase in the public transportation system in Grenada, right? Now, I have to ask you as well, Mr. Diali, we, just listen here, we approached many private sector businesses, and I must say a heartfelt thanks to all the businesses that has partnered with the association to create lower prices, right, for busmen in Grenada. This was done between the association and the private sector. But there's a limit to how that could go, and all of that would change now that freight and stuff has increased, right? So what should we cut since we have already been operating at a loss? We have done, right, what we can do with the best of our ability, right? Conductors and drivers has gotten pay cuts, right? So what else is there for us to do, sir?
Garth, let me ask you, you say what else is there for you to do?
Yeah, that was just
based
a
on my own research. Yeah, I understand. But based on my own research, you also, I know that you said the conductors and some of the drivers got pay cuts. But based on our information, we understand that bus owners provide breakfast and lunch for the driver and the conductor. Would you say that that is one way that costs can also be cut?
That is an area that we can look at, and it's already happening. Now, a basic operator leaves his home, right, at around 5:30, 6 o'clock, right? So at least breakfast, to supply breakfast, right, is something that we do to encourage, right, a conductor to come out of his house before 8 o'clock, or to encourage a driver to get out of his house before a certain period of time. So that is something that we do to encourage that. Otherwise, what you would find happening, right, you may see buses being parked up 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, up to 8 o'clock, right? So we prefer not to see that happening. So we continue to provide that breakfast and even lunch sometimes, because it got to a state where drivers and conductors sometimes stay on the bus and eat while they operate, right? And that is another area that we've been looking at, because this is happening because the flow, the cash flow is just not enough. The amount of persons traveling is just not enough right now. So we have explored a lot of the ideas, and if that is one way we can go, we would have gone that way a while ago.
Okay, let us get to some viewer comments before we take the break, and we have to quickly come back to get the panel to offer some closing comments. But Cheyenne Date is saying the bus conductor might still take his breakfast and lunch from the bag. Damian Calise Castle is saying buses are privately owned and controlled, regulated by government. The buses belong to the owners, not the government. If you put a halt to the public transportation service, the government will respond and should do so favorably. I do not have any evidence of government making any overtures to providing a public transportation service to the country, but point taken there. Cassandra Mitchell is saying, we have to remember that the NBA consists of privately owned vehicles offering a public service. Jason Williams is saying, but that's wrong. You are running your business as a charity and not with the aim of maximizing your profits. And we have another comment from Jan. Jan, she's saying St. David's Zone 2 needs to join the line in the bus terminal. They're chasing each other on the road using the quote conductor cell phone network unquote, while passengers are inconvenienced. The Pound Road Association is a problem. Brother Woodruff, the Pound Road situation, how do you respond to that?
The Pound Road situation, what we call Pound Road is buses that don't go to the line, they fly the route up and down, because there are persons that would come out of their houses at different times. And if all the buses were to stay in the terminal, then you would have members of the public waiting hours to get a bus. All right. And some of the routes are very, very saturated. So there isn't space at some of the terminals to have all the buses parked up. So you're going to have buses on the road, you know, doing that fight. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of public transportation, a lot of new regulations that has to be in place. And what we are saying and what I am saying here is that we need to get some work done. And we are on board and willing to work to get work done to provide a better service to the public. Now, with response, there was one comment there about taking buses off the road. I mean, look at what all Grenadians are going through right now, even private businesses and so on. I think it would be very, very, very unfair to, you know, to shut down, right? These businesses will not be able to open, their employers, customers will not be able to get to these businesses, right? So that is something that I think, you know, we should not aim for, right? And I really do hope that it does not get to a point like that.
Okay, let's entertain some more comments. John Crow Alexander is asking, where is Grenada's booming oil economy? Let's see, another comment. Joan Wellington is saying Grenada needs to get into agro-processing. Just a few days ago in Bathway, I saw so many sea grapes going to waste, and I was saying to myself, these grapes could go into some wine or juice production. Time for Grenada to use up the fruits wasted, mango, golden apples, sauersup, just to name a few. And this has been a refrain for many decades. I don't know when we will get there. Lincoln Depredine, good idea, but it's not a one-way street. Some extra regional partners may look for ways to increase tariffs on what little we send them. So as soon as we increase tariffs on back and neck from Miami, lobbyists in the U.S. can just pressure on Joe Biden, I guess he's saying, to increase tariffs on sauersup from Grenada. Let's see. All well and good, Margaret Francis saying, all well and good to talk intra-regional trade, and I agree 100%, but freight will still be an issue. How are we going to get goods from one island to the other? Transportation between the islands is still a problem. Sue Patrice is saying, what about the oil that was found and announced by the Prime Minister the night before the last election? Sales of that can help cut back on the taxes placed on consumers. And we have many more comments that are coming in. We have another comment, Cassandra Mitchell. We had a public transportation system. Have we forgotten the history of this? Wilma Harbin is saying, talk and more talk. Emancipation, mental enslavement. No constructive outcomes after discussions. Grenada had more items within itself when I was growing up. The sugar factory, soap, Strauss soft drink, the ice cream factory, the ice factory, the corn milling on Tyrrell Street, and the whaling industry, the salt pond, to name a few. Serious intervention is needed to give Grenada moving in the right direction again. All right, folks, thank you for staying with us. This was a very interesting and important discussion today. I will come back and get some closing comments from the panel, and I thank you for staying with us. Please stand by. Since losing that seat, what have you been up to?
Well, Mr. Attorney General,
This particular provision sounds unconstitutional.
But why were there not consultations before moving forward with the proposals? Did they say what will happen when you guys get to St. Vincent? Because there are pressing social economic issues that I would want to address with you.
In the hyper-information age of social media, the Bubb Report knows there is more to the story. We have questions and demand answers. We strive to hold the powerful accountable and tell an unbiased, contextual story. You know what happened. We let you know why it happened. There is always more to the story. The Bubb Report, streaming every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube. All right, welcome back, folks. And we are about to close the program for another week. And let me thank all our viewers and listeners for participating today. Certainly, I want to thank the panel. Sunday is normally a difficult day for folks because, you know, folks have to get caught up for the rest of the week. We have some entrepreneurs here, and we have a professor here as well who I know is probably busy. I know you're well published, Dr. Charles, so we thank you for taking the time. For taking the time for appearing on the report. But Dr. Charles, I want to start with you for some final comments in terms of mitigating this period. From an economic lens, what can we do as a people, going down to sort of bread and butter ways of managing this crisis? Because as I understand it, it will be a protracted period of uncertainty.
Yes, I agree with you. Now, a lot of the commenters, a lot of the panelists discuss about Grenada and inflation in Grenada. But inflation is not just a Grenada problem. As you can see, a lot of primary commodity prices and as well a lot of processed product prices are rising. So it's not just a Grenada problem. It's not just a St. Vincent problem. It's a regional problem. The entire region is experiencing this problem. Now, to address the inflation from a textbook economics point of view, they will tell us try to increase aggregate supply. If you have demand at one point, increase aggregate supply, you cut the demand at a different point, and therefore it will place pressure for price to decline. All right, that is textbook. But from a practical point of view, what this really means, what should we really do? Well, I think that from one of the panelists was highlighting that we have strength in land, we have strength in the agriculture. I think there's scope for us to capture more value added from the agriculture industry. And how we can do this, we can go more downstream processing. We go from just primary agriculture production to go to more agro processing. I think that in terms of trade, we can look to try to strengthen the intra-regional trade within the region, and not just from exporting from Trinidad, because I acknowledge the point that Trinidad export a lot to the other Caribbean countries, but not just from Trinidad to the other Caribbean countries. We're also looking for exports from Grenada to St. Vincent. We're looking for exports from Barbados to St. Lucia. We're looking intra-regional trade. Each country needs to try to find more ways to produce more products and export to the Caribbean region, and collectively we need to work together to help build each other and help address this problem of inflation. I think the CET could help address the whole situation about prices, and I agree in the whole point that if it is we interfere with taxes, this could result in some form of retaliation from our extra-regional trading partners. But as a short-term to medium-term solution, I think this is something that we could do to help mitigate the problem with inflation. Now, with regards to freight, I acknowledge there is a container shortage with freight, and I know with Trinidad and Tobago there are several logistic challenges, because we in Trinidad and Tobago, the government has implemented a curfew, and a lot of people are out of work. So we experience a stagflation problem. A lot of people are out of work, and they have prices going up. And this affecting ability to produce goods on time. This affecting this causing logistic challenges in the ability to ship goods to different countries at time and so forth. And this in turn will cause a rise in cost and a rise in some inefficiencies and so forth. But these are challenges. This is something we need to address, and we need to work together as a region to address these challenges, to bring about some kind of short-term alleviation or mitigation to these challenges. So that would be my concluding remarks. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Charles, thank you so much. I'm going to bring in Brother Garth from the Grenada Bus Association. Let's get some final closing thoughts from you.
I just want to say thank you for having me on the program once again. All right. clearly from, being a part of this discussion, I have realized that, inflation and the cost of freight and all of these other things are affecting everyone, right? It is something that we all have to look at together, right? And from the transportation sector, I am going to look forward to having these sort of discussions with government and anyone that is involved in the sector, so we can help provide a better service to the Grenadian people to help keep Grenada moving, right? We play a very important role in getting persons to and from their destinations, farmers, lawyers, just name it, right? And we have been, I think over time, the association and bus operators in Grenada have been overlooked, right? And hence the reason why we are where we are today. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we are looking forward to contribute to fixing some of the problems that we have here in Grenada as it relates to transportation and so on. So thank you once again.
Absolutely. And Senator Dialli, I trust that in your next sitting of the Senate that you would be playing portions of this program for your fellow colleagues so that they can get a sense of what the people are saying on the ground in Grenada. Let's get some closing thoughts from you, sir.
Thank you, Karen. I will be happy to once the rules allow and the president allows me the flexibility to do it. I mean, I'll be happy to do it. I just want to say, closing, that we're in a perfect storm. Perfect storm meaning we have a situation with COVID that has caused unemployment, pressuring disposable income. We now have inflation, whether it's through rising utility rates and commodity prices. And then we have the whole situation of collective agreements and the labor side of it, with employees demanding more in terms of wage increase, and businesses suffering with the issue of how they could levy price increase and how much they could absorb and all of that. So it's almost a perfect storm for us. And how we deal with it is really going to be a challenge. And as I said earlier, small island developing states like ours have very little power and suasion with some of these cartels. OPEC is a cartel, the shipping lines are a cartel, and when they levy price increases, we have no choice but to accept it. It's either we take it and the ships don't come or commodities don't come. So it really becomes a difficult sway and issue for us. And government could only do so much, in my view, because they have to protect their revenues, some of their revenues, in order to deliver the services to the people of the country. So, fix roads, health, and all of these things. So we're in a perfect storm, and a lot is going to be dependent on you, the individual, and your lifestyle and how you live it in this difficult time. So if we used to drive our car up and down, go by certain people, we may have to reduce the amount of trips we make to save on your disposable income because the price at the pump is higher. You might have certain wants when you went to the supermarket to buy certain things. You now have to change that and restrict it more to needs. When it comes to our children and what we do, we will have to look at some of these things. So individually, I believe, Kellan, all of us have to look internally and see how we as an individual, based on the pressures we face in our disposable income, how we could adjust it and do what it is. But it requires all of us, as Mr. Woodruff said, to sit and see where all of us could give and take and see how we could ride this wave. It will not last for long. I don't think it would, as the world normalizes and we get back into full production and the demand and supply equation equates. But it will require us in these challenging times for all of us to sit and have a discussion on how we could do and adjust where we can so that all of us could have a reduced effect of these inflationary pressures.
All right, and Mr. Williams from Hotspot, let's get some closing comments from you.
Right. So let me just say, right, you hear me, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, perfect, right. No, we need to use this situation, as a learning process, right? And we need to put things in place for the future. That's my thing. Yes, we can complain, but what do we do going forward? Oh, let me just tell the bosses one thing. I worked in Texaco for approximately 2 years, or Chevron. I was the senior accountant for Stellar Lucia, Dominica, Grenada, and St. Vincent. And in doing inventory, I could tell you, one tip for taking gas, the best time to take gas in the day is in the morning, right? Gas expands, right? When it heat. When it cools, it shrinks. So if you take gas in the morning, you will get more gas in the morning than taking it during the day. Number one. Right? Now, who turns an economy is the small man, right? Or the local man, or the man who's doing construction and all these things. He turns the economy. Why? Because when he gets paid, right, his main thing is not to save. His main thing is to spend. And that spending causes the economy to circulate, the money in the economy to circulate. And it helps turn the economy. Now, Dr. Mitchell, in his speech last week, mentioned the debushing program. And he's allocating some money to debushing. Now, I understand exactly what he's doing. Why? Because if you allocate money to the debushing, what you are doing is that you're helping the small man, you're putting money in the small man pocket, and you're helping the economy turn more, right? But as much as I understand that, what he's doing, right? We need to develop a more sustainable way of income in Grenada. We need to not just talk, but to put or to develop a plan for agro-processing. We need businesses to start to assist the local man in his local products, right? We need the public to be aware of the importance of the local man and helping the local man by even buying his goods and services. We need to build our economy. I will end on this. The more we import is the more we help build someone else's economy. We need to start building our economy by producing more and by supporting local going forward. We have to start putting things in place for our future in Grenada and the region as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, for appearing on the report. Certainly, you gentlemen added some very important perspectives and viewpoints to what we are currently facing in the region. And I would end today by citing an article written by some economists who are attached to the Brookings Institution. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. And these learned experts are making the following point, and I'm going to quote from that. And they're saying, once a crisis is in motion, turning it into an opportunity often requires new ways of seeing, thinking, and responding. Applying traditional responses could lessen the pain temporarily, but often is insufficient to solve the underlying problems. Here are a few approaches for getting to win in a crisis, and then they go on to list different approaches. And so I think we are challenged here in the Caribbean to really to turn this COVID-19 pandemic crisis into an opportunity. We have been speaking about it. Programs like these are important where we are highlighting these issues, but how are we going to turn the corner to ensure that we turn this particular crisis into an opportunity? And that's what I would leave you with today. And panelists, let me thank you, Mr. Williams, Mr. Woodruff, Mr. Dr. Charles, and my previous guest, Senator Diali. Let me thank all of you, and to the viewers and listeners, thank you for your spirited participation today. This has been a wonderful program for which I really enjoyed hosting. So on behalf of my producers, I once again thank you for tuning in for another week of the Bubb Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.